Close enough.
Making your coffee?
Lately, at the end of the day, thanks to the Core Web Vitals rabbit hole you guys got me on.
Sorry, dude.
I tried to talk you out of it. You weren't having it, though.
It's fun. I get all kinds of data now.
So you're on the CWV train. It's a key.
Key vital ranking factor. Everyone should spend as much money as they can on doing it.
And time.
I noticed your
Don't
poll.
forget time. Well, thank you everyone for joining us again for another episode of SEO Fight Club. We have a pretty fun topic for some of you. Some of you are probably going to hate my guts and want to argue endlessly. That's okay too. But we'll get into that in a moment. So coming up, we have the SEO video show by Dre DeVera. It's an interview show. So if you're jonesing for content, that's one place you can go. So he's interviewing all the top personalities. We're all just kind of in limbo without SEO this week. So, someday we hope it returns. Hope it isn't too long. But I won't grill Clint on it. He'll let us know when it's getting closer.
Dre's holding down the fort.
Yeah, Dre's doing a good job. Carolyn, what's new on the podcast?
Well, I guess we'll all find out Friday morning.
No spoilers?
No, I think it's just gonna be like, fantasy SEO. Like, client SEO fantasy.
Nice. So yeah, we'll find out when it airs on Friday. What time does it come out on Friday? 8 a.m.?
8 o'clock, 8 a.m. Yes, Central Time.
So we have in the recent courses, we have the Brand SERP Masterclass. So if you're in IMG, check that out. Put your subscription to work. That course is there, so might as well see what it's all about and learn some knowledge. There's a live event on Wednesday the 20th, which we've already missed. It was an hour ago, so sorry about that. Featured Member Friday coming up, the YouTube show roundup. What's that? Oh, guess he muted. And then, of course, on Tuesday, there's the Ask the Expert Live with Kyle Roof. And that'll bring us back to the next Fight Club episode. So today's topic is about suspending disbelief. And so imagine for a moment what it's kind of like being in my shoes, over the course of, a few years, and how many people come to me with theories about SEO, which I like, by the way. I don't want people to stop coming to me with theories, but what I want to do is to point out a common problem with these SEO theories. And so that way you can, figure out these common problems first and then bring them to me, and I won't have to shoot them down so much. Because you don't like it when I shoot down your ideas, and I don't like ideas that are easy to shoot down. So it's like a mutually beneficial problem to solve. And so here's what typically happens. Somebody gets my contact info. They have a great idea about how SEO works, and they really want to share it, which is really cool. And then they contact me and they say, I have this great thing. It turns out that if you just really focus on, quality, that's the magic thing. And all this other stuff in SEO, you don't have to care about. Or if you just focus on keyword clusters, that's the magic bullet, and you don't need to worry about, anything. It's all keyword clusters. And if you do these other things that SEOs say that it's, Google's too smart for that, and you're going to get penalized and you'll have to detune your pages. And they come with these belief-based models of how SEO works. And I typically will listen to them and I'll ask specific questions like, how much keyword density is too much? Or how many keywords can be in your cluster? Can I put 100,000 keywords in the cluster? So I'll ask probing questions. And then typically, based on their answers, I can just go to Google, do a keyword search, and say, well, why is this website that violates your rule in the #1 spot? Because if it's common that you can create one of these belief-based models about SEO, and it's common that I can find things on page 1 that violate the rules of that model, it can't be a very good model. So for, a standard model of SEO, it ought to at least a little bit explain what's on page 1. So if your SEO model can't explain what's on page 1, I think the model needs more work. And so today, I'm going to show you some of that so that when you come to me with an idea about how SEO works, you already know how I'm going to pick at the idea and you can anticipate it. What do you think about that topic, Clint?
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. So today we're going to look again at a keyword that I've looked at many, 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 many times on this show. If you follow this show, you've seen this keyword. And we're going to look at addicting games. So they recently, within the past few months, retook the #1 spot. The top 3 has top 4 actually have kind of all been rotating over the various Google updates and their various SEO initiatives. But they seem fairly locked in. When we look at the volatility, we see that 1 through 3 are definitely locked in. There's a little MRV swapping on the 4 or 5 positions. Then they're locked in with another tiebreaker scenario happening at 11, 12, 13. A little bit of testing there with this Arcadium. We'll talk about it later. But we're going to talk about addicting games because they're back on top. And so, as always, I like to just look at the page we're talking about because it kind of puts the data in perspective. There's a context to the measurements I'm going to show you, and knowing what this page is like makes the measurements all the more exciting. So this is the whole page, top to bottom. So we got the footer down here and the header up here, and the bulk of the content is these video game thumbnails. They got a few, I guess, reviews or something on there too. And everything else content-wise would have to be served up in JavaScript or web services or is hidden in the source code somehow. So on the surface, visually, it's a fairly thin page. It's not big articles. It's not skyscraper. It's just links to games and some navigation for games categories. So when I looked for the exact match keyword, they're using it on that page about 1,200 times. So that's a lot of keyword usage. And the interesting thing about that 1,200 times, one of the reasons I'm really impressed by this website is that it's arguably white hat. They're a page about games. They're being honest about being a page about games. The verbose nature of their honesty is about the games they offer, the categories and the actual games themselves. And there's no crime for being, absurdly honest and verbose. Like that's not a Google guideline you have to worry about. Now, is it aggressive? Yeah. You saw how thin that page was. Try fitting the exact match keyword 1,200 times on a page that thin. Like, they're working hard for this ranking. And, it's arguably still white hat because it's definitely honest. It's a page about games. They offer arcade games, they offer puzzle games, they offer sports games. Nothing about what they've done is dishonest or off topic. What do you think about that kind of gray area of black hat and white hat, Clint? You've done a lot of manual actions in your day.
Yeah, most of the manual actions, those really links. No one's. I think the white hat crowd has won the keyword density game war, I guess it were, or publicity campaign, however you want to say it. So I don't see a lot of people doing this. But since you've illustrated this niche and what they're doing inside of it, I've been trying to replicate it on a lot of my sites and client sites, and it works. It works like gangbusters.
Yeah, and so again, there's nothing dishonest going on here. I mean, they're pages about games, and they're just very verbosely and authoritatively, documenting what their page is about. It's you could call it ridiculous, but there's no rule about ridiculousness. So as long as it's on topic and honest and accountable and transparent, it's still within the guidelines. And the other thing is, I've been reporting on this website and their measurements for years now. If there was something immediately and urgently wrong with this, it would have happened by now. So the fact that I've been reporting on this website for years, and the worst that's happened is they've moved from number 1 to number 3, but now they're back in number 1. I just don't think anything's going to change quickly on it. And the other thing is, people will often say, well, keyword stuffing doesn't work in Google and their AI is way too smart for that. And they'll punish you and you'll have to prune your content because when we see that, you use your keywords too much, we have to cut them back. Well, they got punished all the way to number 1. So if you're a white hat and you're saying you created a blog about games and you use your exact match 23 times on the page, but that's what was natural, is that going to compete for relevancy? As relevancy is calculated mathematically and compared in the algorithm? I don't think it will. I think you'll be at a disadvantage. I had one SEO earlier in the week throw their hands in the air because a report said they needed to use their exact match keyword 69 times on the page. They're like, that's absurd. That's keyword stuffing. It's spam. It's unreadable. No human being would do it. It can't possibly work. This is 1,200, and they're throwing their hand up at the number 69, saying it's beyond their brain's ability to even understand. So, but this isn't like a rare thing. Like the other thing is like, okay, it's games. Well, it's used cars too. It's drug rehab. It's any number of keywords. You can just guess it random. If it's a high volume keyword, it might not be 1,200, it might be 600. but it's going to be more than the 69 that most white hats would throw their hands in the air about. So if you have
Ed,
a oh, go
I was going
ahead.
to say, what's interesting about this is I loaded the page and I wanted to see on the page visibly, if you search for games, there's 29 matches.
Yep.
So, a lot of this is happening, inside of the code where people tend to think of the old, meta keywords tag and keyword stuffing and that. But that's not what you're seeing here, correct?
Yeah, this is, throughout the page, there's a lot of usage. And, if you have a model, a standard model of SEO, and you're saying the way SEO works is X, Y, and Z, it ought to be able to explain why this is working and why examples like this in the #1 spot of Google are in the position they have. Because if your standard model of SEO doesn't account for what currently ranks well in Google, then your model has big problems. Like, it's easy to shoot holes in your model. So whatever your standard model of SEO is that you're going to try to convince me that you're onto something, well, I'm going to think that you're onto something if your standard model can explain these things.
Okay, so here's the next piece that we often hear with stuff like this is, okay, I see the 1,175 exact matches, but when Google figures this out, they're going to penalize addicting games. How do you respond to that?
Again, I've been reporting this in an SEO YouTube show for years, pointing out these measurements. Like, anybody that's followed the show has seen this exact example in at least a dozen different episodes. Like, this is, this might not even be a new slide. I might have just gone to an old slide deck and pulled it. It is a current slide. It is a new slide, but I've done this exact slide so many times. And so if there was something in the algorithm that took care of this, it shouldn't be taking years for it to take care of it. Should have happened by now. So we're going to look at some measurements in a variety of areas. So, I probably popped the bubble just with that one, but we're going to look in some other areas. So now I'm going to look at the number of factors used. This is a factor that Quora measures and was originally discovered by Lee. And so it is simply looking at all of the factors we know how to measure and counting up how many of them aren't zeros, how many of them have any measurement above 0. And we count up the number of factors that are not zeros, and that is the number of factors used on a page. And so Quora is capable with all the configurations in play of getting at most about 2,100 different factor measurements. In general, people don't have all the APIs on it, so it ends up being a smaller number than that on the average run. But there are about 2,100 things in Quora that we know how to measure. And I've never seen somebody with a bigger list than that, but there is the possibility for a bigger list. I guesstimate that there's probably about 10,000 things that ought to be on the list. We just haven't thought of them yet, or we don't know how to measure them yet. But here we're looking at number of factors used from the Quora shared data. It's currently the #2 factor in the shared data. So it's the second strongest factor we know of according to that shared data. And in the #1 spot on Google, across thousands of keywords, the maximum measurement we found was 218 factors in use. The page one average across thousands of keywords is 135 factors. And this factor is applicable when we look at the whole keyword set. It is a strong correlating factor for about 90%, 89% of keywords out there. So it's very broadly applicable. And so I ran Cora on the keyword games, and we can see addicting games in number one here. They have 167. So they're above the shared average for number of factors used. And so we can see they're, they still have some headroom to work with, because in recent months, we only saw a maximum of 218. And so it's interesting looking at this, so we can see that, you need quite a few factors. So if you're not striving to put factor diversity into your page, it looks like factor diversity is a thing and you need quite a bit of it. So if you're only tuning your page and you can only think of about 12 SEO factors that you know of, you might be short a lot competitively. You might want to figure out, what are these 167 things that they've tuned? What's on their list that isn't on my list? And I bet, number 2 and number 3 and number 4 are very interested in what factors Addicting Games thought of that they didn't. But that's a lot of factors. If I told you you need to use your keyword 167 times on a page, you'd already throw your hands in the air. But if I told you you need to use your keyword in 167 different ways on the page, and you'd probably lose your mind. But it's measurable. Let's look at another one. So this one is the number one factor currently in the shared data, the number of entities used. And if you don't know what entities are, they're nouns. They're locations and things and people and brands and everything that you could imagine that has a Wikipedia page to it is an entity. And Google understands those from an AI NLP context. They're terms that Google understands the topical relevance and the words that should appear around those topics. And so we like to measure entities on pages so that we can figure out, are we tuned with that? Because we see lots of clues that they're hardwired into Google all over. So, the number of entities and the number one spot we found in the shared data was 59. And the page one average is 29. And this is a ringer. So in recent months, nobody was running a ringer. So I knew this one was going to shoot it. So if we pulled the shared data again tomorrow, we'll probably see the 89 from the ringer show up in the new shared data. But yeah, we can see that they're definitely tuned to a higher standard than the web at large. And number 2, they're above average. They're still below the number 1 max for other keywords. Number 5 is doing great. But this is the number of entities. So these things like the names of people, the names of places, the recognized categories of games, terminology around games, brands of games, all those things end up being entities, and they've managed to use 89 different ones on their page. And so that's, that's a lot. I had somebody throw their hands up in the air with just using, 89 keywords on a page. Imagine what they think about trying to use 89 different entities on a page. Keywords in the body tag. So this factor was coded in a way that scripts were excluded. So it's more of a visual keyword count in this factor, and that's changing in the next version of Cora. It'll include the underlying as well. I figure that the visible only text should be handled by a different factor. But if you look at the number one, the maximum measurement in the number one spot on Google across thousands of keywords, it's 55,000 keywords in the body tag. Now,
That's got to be one of Clint's pages.
Yeah, exactly. And keywords here is in the context of the variations that Google makes bold in search. So if your search is for games, it'll be game, games, video games, gaming, and those will be your variations. So combinations of, 55,000 of those. The page one average had 479 of those keyword variations. And this factor is a strong correlating factor for 95% of all keywords. So very broadly applicable. So, this is kind of like a degree of keyword stuffing, and it correlates strongly. And we look at what they're doing, and, we mentioned that, they have thin content visually, and outside of the hidden zones, they technically had 296. So those were probably obscured within the menu or things of that nature.
Okay, so Ted, I'm going to push back a little bit. So, because, when you're talking about people bringing theories to you, if I'm looking at this, I could sit there and say, yeah, Ted, but correlation's not causation. How do you know that keywords in the body tag really matters and it's not just a false correlation?
But you just said the AI was too smart and would punish this. Why wasn't the AI smart enough to punish this? Or that thing you just said is false. So you see, it starts with the claim, and I ask details about the claim, and then I pull up the Google search and find things that violate the details of the claim. So if you're making a standard model of SEO and you're going to tell me how it works to specific detail, it needs to account for what's currently on page one. Because if your rule system doesn't account for allowing all of this, it's got a problem. Now, you can argue, well, that's not the thing. It's really an off-page game. Well, I could see that, but, it's still on you to prove it. If you're making the claim, you gotta prove that it works the way you say it works. But if you're making claims that it can't possibly work with this at all, and Google's too smart for that, and they punish it left and right, and if you use your keywords too much, hint, hint, 55,000 times in the number one spot on Google, that Google's going to do something about it. Well, I want to see Google do something about it. Why am I seeing this in measurement data? Why am I seeing this page one average in measurement data? Why am I measuring it in specific examples? It amounts that would make people's heads explode in conversation. And so if you're telling me that there's no way that you can use your keyword that much and Google would punish you for doing it, and the algorithm is too smart to allow it to happen, then explain what we see with our own eyes for very common keywords. Because how come these measurements don't match the rules of the model? And so I'm not saying this is the thing that gets you to number one, but if your model says that this is the thing that gets you punished and kicked out of search, well, this page had 55,000 keywords in the body tag, and they were punished all the way to number one. So explain that.
Luck.
So, I'm not saying that this is the golden ticket, but if you're going to tell me what gets punished and what is over optimization and why you have to detune a page and cut it away, well, how come they can do it? How come this guy can do it? How come all these people across different keywords, how come they can all do it, but I'm not allowed?
I would love
how come
to see
you
that
can?
page.
What's that?
Said I would love to see that page.
Oh yeah, and I bet it's like LinkedIn or something, some directory of lawyers in Chicago or something.
It might be, but just having 55,000 just of the keywords, that's not even the total content.
An endless
That is-
scroll one-page site.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to find that outlier. If there's anybody out there that knows what that keyword is, please let us know.
Well,
Clint and I would like to take a look at the page.
there is a Cora customer that knows this keyword. They ran a report in recent weeks, and they have this number in that report. So it's a small population of people. One of us has that report. And so I put this chart here to kind of show you the correlation. So here on the x-axis, we have the page number in Google, page 10, page 9, heading to page 1. And on the y-axis, we have the average factor measurement by page. And so we can see the trend line is up. So the more of this factor you tend to have, the better you tend to rank. And so that's what correlation is the, the slope of the trend line. It's a descriptor of that slope. And that's why we like to see negative correlation coefficients because for unmanipulated natural factor data, the slope of the line should be negative. And so we'd want strong negative correlation coefficients because they're describing the slope of that trend line. And so when you get used to it, you can see a correlation like this and go, the trend line's going like that for this factor. And that's what we like to see, when the data is random and chaotic and there is no slope to the trend line, then it's just random. But when there's a strong slope to the trend line, then we're interested in these factors. And if we have a measurement that's below average on page 3, but we want to be above average on page 1, then we kind of know where we're at and where we need to be on a particular factor. So we'll look at another one, keywords and heading tags. So in the shared data,
Hold on a second. Have you actually had someone tell you that keywords and heading tags will get you some sort of naughty surprise?
In terms of if they need to do 69 more of them, 69 more keywords in the heading tag, well, that'll get you in trouble. It's the same thing as on the page. If they object to it in the page, they're definitely going to object to it in a specific part of the page.
Okay, I'm going to mute now so you don't hear my eye roll on this one.
But yeah, the SEO that I had threw their hands up, it was just 69 on the page anywhere. And now we're talking about in headings. And so the maximum measurement found in the number one spot on Google across thousands of keywords was 300. But the page one average tends to be about 10 keywords in headings. And it's broadly applicable, 93% of keywords. We look at addicting games, and this is really interesting. So the Quora data knows that the page one average is 10. They're tuned to 11. So yeah, I think it's remarkable. I'm actually a little shocked that it's not tuned higher. And this is H1s through H6, and we combine them all as one group for headings overall. Got one here, PBS Kids has 24, so they're not even the highest one, but they use a lot more keywords elsewhere. But it's interesting that they're tuning to a standard that is broadly applicable to about 92%, 93% of keywords. Keywords in the title tag. So maximum measurement in the number one spot. Imagine a title that has your variant keywords 19 times in the title tag. That's awesome.
That's
the
one of
page one,
Kyle's.
yeah, the page one average is 2, which we're all common with. That's pretty common, especially if you use an exact match domain, because then you're the best plumber in Seattle at seattleplumber.com. That's totally common. That's expected. Addicting games, they're tuned to 3 keywords in the title tag. And when we look at AARP and Epic Games, they're 3 and 3. And then we look at the next few, and it's 1, 1, 2, 1, 2. It's not until Cartoon Network that you get back to 3. And I would guess that this guy and these two, they're all kind of watching each other. We see these, shift in rankings. I think these guys are all closely watching each other. So before we looked at all headings, now we're just going to look at H2 tags. And the number one maximum found in just H2 tags was 86. But the page one average is 4. And so, that's amazing. An H2 tag or a series of H2 tags having 86 keyword variations in them. So Addicting Games has 6 keyword variations in H2 tags. And then AARP had none, and Google didn't have any keywords in H2s, and Wikipedia didn't do it. So it looks like, there's less competition for tuning in H2s. And we'll take a look at some H2 data in a minute. All right. So this is the content report in Quora. And it's kind of a way to eyeball the content of 100 web pages at the same time. So I can see all the images from the top 100 pages all in one view, or all the headings, or all the titles, or all the meta descriptions, or all the open graph. So the content report is all about kind of seeing the top 100 all in one viewpoint. And so we're looking at the titles from the top 100, and we can see how they're tuned. Remember, I said that Addicting Games had 3 keywords in their title? This is how they did it. They said games, free online games at Addicting Games, 3 keywords. And we pointed out that the other ones did too, free online games, internet game sites, play puzzles, cards, brain games. So they find ways to do it. Then we looked at the other ones, and they were less. when we look at the H1s, so there wasn't an H1 for addicting games that had the keyword. So AARP ended up being the first one in that list. Much less tuning in the H1s, but there's still some. Now the H2s get interesting. Remember, we pointed out those H2s and that addicting games was being a lot more aggressive about it. They had 6. Well, here are those 6. They actually had more than 6 H2s, but only 6 had their keyword. And then when we look at AARP, they could have had, games colon mahjong, games colon solitaire, games colon word, games colon arcade. They could have tuned their H2s better, probably should have. It looks like everybody except addicting games is they've got issues with their H2s. And then in H3s, it all goes to crap. It's a lot of it's off topic even. These probably shouldn't even be headings. They should probably be stylized span tags instead of headings. So communities, AARP Foundation, for professionals, health and wellness. These are, for being a heading on a page, these are off topic. Now they're on point for AARP, but an AARP games page, these are off topic. They probably shouldn't have the signal of a heading. What do you think about that, Clint?
Yeah, I agree. I've talked for a long time that if it's not related to your content, then it shouldn't have a heading. Use font and size to get the same look that you're going for with the H3.
Yeah. So yeah, the tuning gets pretty bad, and this is probably a spot where you can get ahead is by taking advantage of these specific deficits. And then H4, the problem gets worse. It looks like you got game names here. But again, it could have been game colon stupid zombies, game colon tanks battlefield, games colon 3D bowling. Still
a little more natural would have been, you could do 3D bowling by, and then whoever makes the game. So 3D bowling by Ted's Games.
Yeah, or the category. So it could have been, sports games colon 3D bowling, or simulation games colon tanks battlefield. So they could have worked the category into these headings and it would have been totally on topic.
Yeah, 3D bowling in sports games.
Yep. And they didn't really have heading 5 and heading 6. There's a couple examples, but they weren't tuned either. So meta descriptions. So look at addicting games here. I know it's hard to read, but you can see the yellow is a keyword match. So they had 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 keywords in their meta description. And then the next few players didn't even set a meta description. They're like, let Google sort it out. We can't be bothered. And a number of places adopt that too. And when we look at YouTube, here's one. This is a Google property. YouTube didn't do the meta description. And here they are with an average rank of 11, 11 and a half. We'll call it 12 and 13. So 11, 12, and 13 based on different descriptions that Google is picking for the page. So Google is split testing the different descriptions it's picking. And we can see over here that the X's represent when that didn't appear in search, and there were 20 samples. And so we can see Google trying different descriptions out. And these 20 samples, they were collected in about a minute. So we did the search 20 times as fast as we could, and we saw all this A/B testing happening with these 3 different descriptions, all because they didn't tune it. Then Addicting Games up here like a boss. It's like, screw that. I don't want to be put in 13 by Google. I want to be in number 1, so I'm going to control my destiny and tune that field. So I guess, these guys, this might be hurting them. Google might have selected something from the page that isn't this well optimized. And clearly, going from 11, 12 to 13 on these different titles, that's volatility. It does affect your ranking. The web page, this YouTube gaming games page, isn't changing this many times in a minute. So the only thing that's really changing on this page is what Google's choosing to display, and it affects rankings. And imagine if you were like a big website like AARP and you didn't tune or specify your meta description on all 400,000 pages on your website, and you saw volatility from it. That's a lot of volatility in rankings. So I definitely like seeing the winner is tuning it like a boss. And then there are people who say, well, you don't have to do that. Google doesn't use it. Google does a better job of it. If you keyword stuff your meta description, you'll get penalized for it, or you won't win the click because it'll look spammy. Well, again, they got punished all the way to number 1. If that's in your standard model of SEO, why are they punished all the way to number 1? And they've been there for years. If the algorithm was going to do something, it would have happened by now. And then at the beginning, I mentioned that I'd come back to Arcadium, which was that testing one that was in the number 10 spot, and it only showed up for one of the 20 searches. And it turns out they're actually seeing keyword cannibalization. So 95% of the time, their homepage is ranking typically at the number 68 spot. And then 5% of the time, they're on page 1, which is amazing. It's incredible. And, I would want to know in this case, what is it about this free online games inner page that's page 1 worthy? Because, the homepage here, the tree trunk probably has all the backlinks. So I kind of get why Google is ranking that the most, like the authority is on this homepage. But this page here probably has the relevance to do well, to perform, but none of the backlinks. So if I saw this, the experiment I would want to run is I would want to put the homepage content on this page and this page's content on the homepage, see if I can't get the homepage with this type of ranking consistency on page 1. And so I went and looked at that page. I was like, well, how many times are they using the keywords on that page that's going page 1 5% of the time? And it appeared 9,500 times on the page. And that's the one being tested on page 1. I mean, that's remarkable. So if your model is this doesn't work that way, then why is Google testing this page on page 1? Why would Google test that? If its AI is so smart that it'll rule that out just automatically, is a spammy violation, and they're actively putting it in there. It's remarkable. What do you think, Lee?
You got me right now. I'm trying to look at the homepage and see how many times
It's about 7,000 on the homepage.
So it's interesting. You know, I think that's one of the interesting things about, and I've seen this in a lot of different discussions, is that we tend to argue with data. And so, you know, if you have a theory about SEO, like, oh, this is too many, you know, if you put more than 58 keywords on a page or in your code, whatever it is, then bring the data that shows that, and, you know, have at least some answers like you're talking about here for the ones that violate it. And here in this particular case, you know, if you've got their homepage, it's got 7,000 keywords, and this page that they're testing has got 9,500 keywords, you know, in the code, you know, I can see where an algorithm would be testing that. And, you know, if I were Arcadium, I'd want the, you know, the number 10 ranking over the, you know, 60, 70 ranking. And I would do what I, you know, could to do that. But I think that's a flaw in most people's thing, is that you can always find a case study that supports whatever theory you have, but it's got to be broadly applicable. You've got to be able to sit there and say, this is how Google would measure it. This is how they would penalize that. And here's my, you know, proof of that. And most people don't go to that level. They just, you know, have a theory that explains one situation, but it doesn't, you know, apply across the board.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I picked the examples I picked. Like those factors we looked at, they were all 90% applicable to thousands of different keywords. And so they're broadly applicable absurdities. And yeah, you know, and I'm not saying that, you know, the key to success is to keyword stuff your page to, you know, 9,500 times. You know, the number one question in SEO, I think, that all SEOs need to be asking themselves is, if they can do it, why can't I? And the thing to understand is that there's probably a reason. And understanding that reason is your path to ranking better. So in this case, I think factor diversity is the reason. There's a web spam algorithm called MC4, and I would not be surprised if Google doesn't have something very similar to that algorithm, if not exactly that algorithm. And what that algorithm says is that if you exploit a minority of factors, the search engine should ignore that minority of factors. Just drop them out of the ranking score. And we've all seen it where people are like, you know, oh, I'm going to get backlinks. You know, I got 500 backlinks and my rank improved, so I'm going to do 1,000. Oh, I got to 1,000 and my rank got better, so I'm going to do 50,000. Well, it got even better. I'm going to do 250,000. Site tank. You know, that's the kind of thing that you would see with MC4. And it's not always just backlinks. It might be 9,500 keywords, you know, in the page, in some zone of the page. But the thing about MC4, how you tune around it, is diversity. You don't have a minority of factors. If you're exploiting all the factors, you just rank well. It's only when you exploit 4 of the factors that you look like a freakish outlier and it doesn't work. And so, you know, there's very likely a reason why they can do this and you can't. And I think for addicting games, I think the reason they can tune to that degree is they have great off page, they have great on page, they have a lot of trust signals, they have, you know, a lot of viral buzz, they have a lot of confirmation traffic, they have a lot of accountability. There's just a lot they have going on that allows them to exploit things to a higher extent than probably your average WordPress blog. And what do you think about diversity, Lee?
Well, I think I think that diversity is a huge deal, and just the number of factors used being routinely, it's number 2 right now, but it's always vying for that top spot in terms of the top correlating factors. But you also raise an interesting question, so I'm gonna frame it this way. I think clearly somebody has come to you on more than one occasion and said, "Oh, here's my SEO theory. Quality matters." And I know that your standard process is, how do you measure that? How do you measure quality? So how did that discussion go in terms of, quality or some of these other things? Like, I know we've talked about it. You've talked about it on Fight Club with EAT, for example. There are challenges to measuring certain, components in that. So your discussion with, an individual who says, my theory is that it's all about quality. How did they suggest you measure quality?
Yeah, when it comes to quality and expertise, they can never quite put their finger on it. And I don't blame them, because I can never quite put my finger on it either. It's a very hard thing to measure. And it usually turns around with, well, the quality is an absence of spamminess. And then I'm like, well, okay, what's spamminess? And then they're like, well, using your keyword too many times on the page. And, it's always something of that vein. It's always like in that ballpark where they can't quite define how quality or expertise is measured. It's some AI magic, and that the AI is way too smart for the spamminess. But yet, from what I can tell, and you can pick any keywords, doesn't need to be this one, just pick, high volume keywords and go check. You'll see that it's always like this. There are very high measurement counts for those high volume, high competition keywords. So, from what I can see, the way that it works isn't that high volumes of keyword counts is a punishment thing. It's not an absence of that kind of spamminess that takes you to the top. That just seems to be fundamentally untrue with what you can see on page 1.
So what is a good way if somebody has an interesting SEO theory, and legitimately they think that they have an idea about how some aspect of Google's algorithm might work? What's a good way for them to bring that to you in a way that would be productive or lead to a productive conversation?
The thing that would just blow my mind is if they came to me with the theory and they said, Ted, I have this theory about how SEO works, and I looked at the game's keyword, and it kind of explains the sort order very well. Can I show it to you? That is coming at it in the right way, because you're saying, I went and looked at what is ranking, and my theory is based on how they're ranked. And that's the thing that's missing in these repeat conversations. And it's quite possibly the most important part.
Seems reasonable to me.
What do you think, Clint? Do we still have Clint? Did we lose him? I think we lost Clint. He probably had a call. So with that, that's the show, I think. Yep. That's all the slides I have. Let me take a look if we have any questions. We have a what's up from Dre. He approved of the punished to number 1 comment. Yeah, I'm kind of being silly when I say they got punished all the way to number 1, but you know, when people tell you how it doesn't work, and then you see that technique in the #1 spot, well, you know, what else can you assume? You know, I see Arcady there commenting on how to do the game names, so shout out to Arcady. But yeah, you know, there's a question there. Will this work if you become an outlier because of going way above the other pages on the first page? You know, we tested for going beyond 2 standard deviations of the page 1 mean. And so that's the Kyle Roof definition of over optimization. It's a pretty popular one, and it served him well in a lot of the SEO that he does. And, you know, that's an interesting pattern. But when it comes to defining what gets punished in Google that we can test, those limits don't actually get things punished. Like the punishment never comes. And to test it, we've done things like create test pages that rank from 1% keyword density to 12% keyword density. So we have a test page for each percentage of keyword density. And then we throw in a ringer beyond that standard deviation. We throw in one that's 95% keyword density. And you know what Google does? It sorts them by density descending, puts 95% keyword density at the top, and then it'll go to 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, all the way down to 1. So going beyond 2 standard deviations beyond the page 1 mean did not trigger over optimization. It may serve you well in the SEO that you do, but it doesn't appear to be how search works either. What do you think about that, Lee?
Well, you know, as a tester, I like pushing the limits. And, you know, on a lot of these theories, I have worked my tail off to try to trigger, you know, penalty or response or anything else. And I think Clint had an interesting observation earlier that he hasn't seen manual actions, you know, for they're primarily for link building rather than on page. I don't think there is an algorithmic penalty for on page per se, unless you're trying to exploit a minority of factors, in which case, you know, Google will just turn off the score for a particular factor, and it can feel like a penalty, but it's not.
Yep. And so in testing, you know, we don't see over optimization. So when people have a rule about over optimization, I always ask them very quickly, what's the limit? How much gets me in trouble? Because how much gets me in trouble is testable. And not only is it testable, I could even go and search for it. So if you tell me that if you use your keyword more than 5 times in the title tag, that'll get you knocked out of the top 100. Well, I can go and find websites that are in the #1 spot on Google that violate that rule. And then I could also test for it in my own test cases.
Dane has an interesting question in there. He said, what if I say pixies are picking sites? Your first page test fails to prove me wrong. And he's laughing, but you know, the thing about it is there are a lot of belief-based theories that come and say, well, you know, the AI is beyond our understanding, and therefore, you know, we can't see everything that it's doing, which is true, but also saying, therefore, Google is, you know, imparting quality onto the site. That's where that is just as flawed as anything else, I think. You know, at the end of the day, an algorithm has to measure something in order to sort, you know, to come up with a score in a sort order. It has to measure something. And, you know, saying pixies, okay, we can't measure pixies. That's true. If Google has some magic pixie room there that, you know, it's doing it, yeah, we couldn't disprove that one. But, you know, there is a lot of SEO theory that is almost based on this pixie model. the belief that the algorithm, the AI is so smart that it's beyond our measurement, it's beyond our understanding, and we just have to accept the benevolent rankings.
Yeah, like another belief that is commonly held is don't do your meta description and Google will pick the best one on your behalf. Like that's a very common belief. And it's why those websites, when we looked at that slide, why they're doing it. But I followed a bunch of those websites as an experiment to see which one Google ultimately settled on. And 2/3 of the time, it was the lower ranking description. They didn't pick the one that ranked the page best. And it's like, why would you let Google do that? Like, why would you leave it up to Google? Because what Google's picking isn't what's best for your page's ranking. They have some other KPI for something they're looking for that probably yields shareholder value. And the ranking of your page isn't necessarily that answer. And so I think it's crazy that people leave the meta description untuned. Obviously Google, for anything other than your target keyword, Google's going to pick from the page anyway, but at least for your most important target keyword, control your fate. And so, yeah, there's a lot of beliefs in SEO that when you get the data, you simply need to suspend your belief. You got to follow the data because your feelings on the matter, they complicate things. You make all these excuses for what sounds reasonable and seems rational. It sounds reasonable that Google's AI at this day and age would not allow keyword stuffing to work. But if you actually test it and look at the data and look at what's ranking, you'll see that that's not what the AI is doing at all. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week. I hope you had some fun on this. Oh, there's one last question. Can we do this like your example with Cora Lite, or do we need the full version? I don't think you get the shared data in Cora Lite, but you can obviously run the reports and see who's ranking. You could do similar stuff. You just wouldn't be able to compare to the shared data. You can definitely find outliers of ridiculous measurements on page 1 with Cora Lite. So the basic premise of what I've done here, you could do. All right. Thank you, everyone.